Hi, this is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and I've been a tax attorney for about 20 years. And I can tell you something. It's sort of a little known secret, and not maybe not much of a secret, that tax problems often cause divorce, and divorce often causes tax problems. It goes either way; they go hand in hand. So I've seen firsthand what the IRS does to couples and sort of that dynamic. Whether you're in the U.S., there's many ways the IRS can really, really hurt marriages. We're not going to talk about those so much today, but rather we're going to focus on how the IRS destroys marriages and families around the world. And before we get too much into this, I just want to send the mic over to Keith Redmond on this one. Keith lost his mom last week, and this is a great group that I'm a part of with Keith and John, and really a close group. And it's Keith has been taking care of his mom for a long time, so we knew it's coming. So Keith, with that, I'm going to send it over to you. What are you?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. I just want to just send a message out for those who are listening live and to those who will listen to thank them for all the text messages, emails, Facebook messages, etc., giving their condolences and best wishes to me. I greatly appreciate it going through this very difficult time. So I thank you. That's all I have. Back
Well,
to you.
Keith, this is the important stuff in life. You were able to be there for your mom to the end and be with her, and now you have the adjustment now, which is hard. And this is just sort of what I couldn't escape thinking about, is that families need to be together. That when crises happen, you need to be get together, and it just sort of the topic of today really came to my mind, and that there's enough struggles in life. There really are. There's enough heartbreak and struggles in life. We don't need more on top of it. Yeah, but
Absolutely.
today's topic, and this is a common issue of I think I've developed some some therapy related skills as I talk to clients and and spouses who aren't necessarily getting along because of something. But Keith, so why don't we start it off with you? So how common? Let's just want to start that. How common is it for IRS problems to cause marital distress around the globe?
Well, it is quite common, unfortunately. As you know, I deal with American immigrants with an E and accidental Americans for that point, but mainly American immigrants who have problems because many of them are married to a non-American spouse, and as a result, just the fact of having, if they are in the US tax system or need to be in the US tax system, their non American spouse wants nothing to do with the US tax system and anything that they have financially, whether that be their bank accounts, their income, etc. And so it does put the American overseas, I'll just say, in a precarious situation where he or she might want to enter the US tax system for whatever reason, but they have their hands tied to a certain degree because the non American spouse says, you cannot share anything about me, nothing at all. That's number one. Number two, you have a situation where the American spouse has taken off all of the bank accounts off the house, everything, and it's all in the non American spouse's name. Well, that solves the problem, if you will, in the short term, but heaven forbid if that non-American spouse passes away, it puts the American spouse in a precarious situation as
Ooh.
far as dealing with everything that one needs to deal with after death. The other thing, number three, is I've dealt with American immigrants who their only recourse was to divorce. They're still together, but they had to divorce to separate everything out
Oh my
just to
goodness.
make it easier moving forward. And to be honest with you, when I hear this, it makes me sick that this is what the US tax system does. And it's something that gets ignored and does not get addressed as far as another major problem on how the US practices an extraterritorial tax regime. So voila. I mean, it's
Wow.
awful.
Wow, you just said a lot. And wow, I mean, so let's just back up a little second, because I think maybe some people are confused, like what just happened there. So let's say that an American goes over to France and marries a French person. So you're saying that there could be a problem there. And we've actually had a few guests explaining exactly that problem. Um, uh,
Yeah.
so exactly what is I mean, okay, so there's problems, but why is it the income tax that's causing it? I guess what's exactly the mechanism by which it's dragging everybody in?
Well, I mean, you guys know more the meat and potatoes of it than I
Mhm.
do, but when you're commingling finances and so forth, there are situations where the non-American spouse's information and financial details is shared within the U.S. tax declaration with the IRS. Or if, like any married couple, you're on joint accounts, and maybe one of those joint accounts is where the non-American spouse's income goes into, salary, et cetera. And if that non-American spouse says, I want nothing shared with the IRS that has anything to do with me, what does the American spouse do in that
Yeah.
situation? So it
Well,
creates, every situation has its own nuance, but it creates a bit of a maelstrom, and sometimes a serious one within the relationship, which also affects the kids when you think about it.
mhm.
So it's really, and not to be histrionic, but it's really a horrendous situation.
All right, I just want to shoot this out in the messages. If the IRS has negatively impacted your marriage or family life, just leave a comment right now. We want to address those as we go along. John, what is the cause of this? And what would you say is the cause of this? The marital strain does exist. We can absolutely agree to that. But what would you say is the cause of this precisely? Could you get to a precise cause?
Um, well, it's an extreme for okay. To in fairness, okay, for a certain subset of married couples, I mean, I presume that's what we're talking about here. There really are no issues because they don't know enough to really, think about it at all. I mean, the American may file tax returns, whatever. Maybe doesn't know they have to file tax returns, but people have a tendency to see taxation in terms of the system they know best. So, if you're in Canada or France, without knowing more, they would presume that, well, so what's the big deal? We're married in Canada, it's not a problem. We're married in France, it's not a problem. But, once they start to learn more or try to learn more about this is typically when the problem begins. Because, first of all, it's completely incomprehensible, right? I mean, we all would agree with that. Even the people who understand this are permanent students of this sort of thing. But, I think that, we've talked about identity and stuff like that. Um, the defining characteristic of the American, unfortunately, I think, is fear of the government. Okay. I mean, you go to Canada, you go to France. I mean, their citizens don't fear the government the way American citizens do. So, you have this, the inability to understand it, coupled with the threats of penalties that are so extraordinary that people can't think straight. The inability to get any information, or if they do, they get three or four different answers to the thing. The propensity in the compliance world to, beat the penalty drum. And then once they realize, so I mean, that's the first part. I mean, that's just the emotional drag of it, which is bad enough. But, then you get into the problem of, families have a responsibility to do some kind of financial planning, right? And for most people in the modern world, that includes, using tax deferred vehicles, et cetera, under their own tax laws to do that, which is a general principle are denied to U.S. citizens, right, because of the the saving clause and that sort of thing. So you get that extra stress of how as a family do we manage retirement planning if one family member is an American citizen, and then that starts the shuffling assets around, et cetera, which as Keith points out, very often involves one spouse having none of the assets, right? And that creates its own strain. It's it's a terrible, terrible problem. Okay, it really is. What can I say?
Yeah, well, now you made me realize there's situations because you're right. There's situations where you can live overseas, and I think this is the distinction. As I was thinking of, if you're marrying someone like you, there's usually not the problems. And then by like you, I mean, well, if you marry another American, live overseas, you both are sort of in there as it is, and you
Well,
have
it's not gonna affect the marriage,
right.
okay? Because they're both caught up in this, right? I mean, it's going to affect the general problem of financial planning. But you
Yeah.
see, marriage, is not the easiest thing in the world in any case. But when you start adding the strain of a third party, you see the problem. I think here's how I think I might describe it. I never quite thought of it this way. In a marriage between two Americans, the IRS is an irritation, but it's not a third party in the marriage. In a marriage between an American citizen and a non-American, okay, the non-American needs to understand the IRS is a third party in the marriage, and effectively, they're marrying the IRS,
Yeah.
and that is, that's a good reason to think long and hard about being married to an American. I think.
Yeah, and these are the situations where the problems are the worst. Is when you have one spouse who earns their own, either has their own business, and the other spouse doesn't. The other spouse doesn't. The other spouse, hey, look, I'm doing all this and doing all this, trying to make some money, and the other spouse doesn't even understand that what goes into doesn't understand the whole perspective of running a business. And so that's one spot right there, and that's including the when I have representing clients in the U.S., that's really the worst thing, where I'm looking at this like, okay, here's the man working his butt off and he hasn't been paying his taxes. Here's the wife who's thinking the husband's doing something shady, not trusting him, but actually he just has a tax problem. He doesn't have there's no mistress. There's no the mistress is the IRS, I would say. And the suspicion that comes up can be fatal. Like, don't understand it. Something shady is going on because I don't understand it. Well, that's all the taxes. No one could really understand it. The issue now compounds itself. I think it's greater is when that dynamic moves overseas. Somebody who's a U.S. person who marries someone with a tremendous amount of wealth, there's your problem right there. That is, oh boy, that's not going to work out.
Well,
You're going to have a huge problem.
Yeah. So you raise a number of different things. Let me start with the last one about the whole wealth issue. There are community property jurisdictions in the world, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah. Yes, please. And I knew you were going to know the answer, so please continue.
Well, obviously I'm not an expert. I mean, who is an expert on anything unless you specifically live in the country, right? But
Yeah.
in community property jurisdictions, the family property is shared 50-50, right? And I'm sure for the high end estate lawyers, they'd say, oh, that's a gross oversimplification, but it does open the door to what the rules are.
Well, I would just say this: they can have their theory all they want, but if you live in a community property state, and let's just say that you don't even file with your spouse, you file separately from your spouse. If your spouse runs up a tax bill, guess what? The IRS will levy your wages 50% of them.
They'll do that. They'll do that. But
so that's how it can work. That's how it works in this United States.
You can do that, Anthony. But here's the real problem, right? So as you know, from the U.S. perspective, right, property rights and ownership are defined under the law of the country where they live or whatever.
No, well, defined in the U.S. it's defined by the state.
Yeah, or the state they live.
Yeah.
California. We could use California as the proxy inside the United States for this, right?
Yep.
But the point here is that the American spouse can acquire through operation of these community property laws, right, assets of a wealthy person, right? And so what happens is that gives the IRS an entry point into this stuff, which is a problem. Another point that I want to make before I forget this: sometimes it's the simplest things that make all the difference. Since the 2017 change in the tax laws, okay, let me back up. I think we all three of us would agree. I think that as a general principle, an American citizen married to a non-American outside the United States would use married filing separately, right, as the default
Right.
filing category. Okay. But under that category, since 2017, the normal filing thresholds don't apply. In fact, the way the law is written, somebody married filing separately is required to file an income tax return every year. Now, the IRS recognized this and put a $5 floor on it. So not quite everybody, but if you have $5 of income, you have to file. So effectively, all of these American, if you have an American spouse, perhaps little or no income, it's required to file anyway. Okay, you say, so what? Well, remember that if you are required to file a tax return, you're subject to the Form 8938 regime, right? Okay. And the Form 8938 requires the disclosure of, really all financial assets, not real estate. So we've got the community property rules, right? But we've also got the problem of signing authority over any accounts, right? So this is, if this is understood properly, this is a very, 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 very powerful incentive to keep the American citizen disassociated from anything to do with money, and assets, et cetera, because, this isn't it doesn't become a question of putting your spouse's tax information on the return. I don't think you have to do that. But all of a sudden, you're required to disclose your relationship to all kinds of assets that you share with that spouse, right? Now, maybe through planning ahead, you get around this, but the way you get around it is to make sure you don't have any signing authority, right? So what you then have is a situation where, basically the idea is to set up a fence and keep the American on the other side of the fence to make sure they have nothing whatsoever to do with any of the family assets. And, this is, obviously an indescribably unjust thing. I think, statistically, I don't know this from firsthand information, but when I read about this, this is generally described in relation to American women living overseas, married to non-Americans. And what I find amazing is that the same political party, that somehow supports this type of stuff, right? Ignores the fact that they're causing, such significant problems for women.
Yeah. Oh, no question about it.
Major problems.
I've talked to him, and I'll talk. I've talked to a woman who married someone wealthy overseas, and I'll talk to her and her husband's. What is this about? Because first of all, they have to understand you married a person, and they cannot understand when you're dealing with someone who lives overseas. They can't possibly believe this is true. They can't possibly believe that our tax code is this crazy and insane and has no logical purpose except to collect massive amount of information for control purposes. That's the first problem. So if you're not a U.S. person, it's a very difficult thing culturally to accept this entire absurdity. It's been around for us for 1913. And so we've kind of grown into how crazy it is. For people on the outside who don't deal with this abusive regime like the IRS, it's a hard sell. Here's a comment from Mike Breen, someone who, one of our fantastic viewers, always has great comments here. He said he saw a marriage in Belgium canceled when these issues started coming to light. I've long said that the basic human right to secure family life is being trampled upon here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about with people paying their fair share. We're so beyond that. You're destroying families. You have the most amoral tax code around. Just stop right there. Stop right there. You got to redo it. This is no good. You can't go any further. And we all should be saying this. Like, this is insane. This is completely insane. And Mike follows up with this comment here. You can't beat financial worries to help bust up a marriage. A U.S. tax code and abroad brings financial worries and insecurity. And that is absolutely 100% true. And we're having that. I mean, this is going on. This is going on. It's not a secret. And we have neither political party saying, it's like, oh, they get up there. They always talk about, hey, we got to protect America's hardest working families is always what they say. The hardest working families, never the harder or the hard. Always
it's an outright lie. Okay,
Yeah.
that is an outright lie.
Yeah.
Such bullshit. I mean, it's just because you have to remember, though, in fairness, that these politicians don't understand this either. Okay, so
Right, true. That's
so
true.
from their point of view, they would think
What are
that
we
you're
gonna do?
making this up. Now, in my view, this whole thing, this sort of what really is a fiscal prison, right? U.S. citizenship taxation is a fiscal prison. I mean, really, you've got to think the OVDI programs, plus the
Oh,
tax
oh,
compliance industry. Unfortunately, for creating this stuff, I do not. The whole notion of the PFIC never existed till the offshore voluntary disclosure programs.
that's true. That is true. That is true.
Uh,
I
you
was
know,
there for that. I was there. We were developed that. I developed that.
Anthony, the tax profession, really, really needs to understand that they bear a very high degree of responsibility for this, because the way they behave sooner or later becomes the law. If everybody had ignored the whole PFIC thing, which they probably should have, because I mean,
Yeah.
there's a history to it. Maybe we do a separate podcast on this, okay? But when I say ignore it, I'm not saying ignoring the law, okay? But there's an interesting way that this somehow worked its way into people's lives, right? But I mean, the tax compliance community is responsible for this. I mean,
Yes,
they really are.
it is. Yep.
And it's the cross-border community primarily, because nobody inside the United States understands this stuff well enough. But I just wanted to add something talking about the married filing separately in the Form 8938, for example. Married filing separately is a general principle, whether you're inside the United States or out, is a very, very punitive tax filing category. And unless there's something I missed, I haven't really thought about this for a while since this conversation, the filing thresholds, the asset thresholds for assets that require you to file a Form 8938 is lower if it's married filing separately. Okay, at least I believe it is.
You're right. No, you're right. You're totally right. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. You're right.
So, if you put it that way, right, they all have to file a return, because that's the way the tax code, if you want to use that category.
Yeah.
And the effect of using that category is a whole lot of additional bad things happen. That you move into reporting requirements at lower levels of income, and all kinds of things. So, this is a very, very serious problem. And I think it might be, in fact, I was actually thinking of doing this once, and I might still do it, is, there's all these marriage preparation courses, right? And I think that what's needed is a separate, so you're thinking of marrying an American prep course. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I would be willing to do a series. We ought to do a series on IRS medic. So you're thinking of marrying, Anthony can become the world famous therapist, the marriage counselor.
Well, I'm worried about it because it's a great idea, but if we're training them what it takes to be an American with the tax code, they're not going to have a lot of time for their marriage.
Well, this is a problem.
That's the problem.
It takes a it takes a lot of time to be an American. Okay?
It does. It does.
We've talked about renunciation, and we describe it as retiring from the time-consuming obligations of being an American, reporting and things like that. I don't know. I mean, actually, Anthony, it may very well be that renunciation should be considered as a form of marriage prep.
It could be. Well, and I also think about what you're getting into could be a good prep too. And I just want to sort of you reminded me of this. This is really the part that hits my gut so bad. Imagine this. Imagine that you're in France and you're doing well for yourself. You marry a beautiful American bride. Everything's fine. She's taking care of the kids. You put it on a few of her accounts. Comes to find out she has a massive, massive problem, and she needs to come clean with the IRS. And coming clean involves a whole bunch of penalties. Mm. Now, how do you feel about your lovely wife after you take a look at your bank account and it's down, and actually your assets are knocked down 50%?
Well, I think, to be fair, Anthony, first of all, you need to be very, very careful who your advisor is. All right.
Well, but I'm telling you, it's happened, and the advisor.
I know it's happened. But the way I think of Americans abroad, you use the phrase "come clean," right, and that suggests they're somehow dirty. I put them in three categories, or I think here's a useful way to view it. Okay, you can view Americans abroad as filthy, dirty, and grungy. okay, or something like that. Now, if they're just grungy, meaning they got some footfalls and stuff like that, probably no problem at
Hmm.
all. Um, it's I think okay. First of all, um, you have to understand, right? If any retail person who happens to be married to is an American married, you have to understand that that these compliance people may be looking out for you, but they're also looking out for themselves, right? So there's a tendency to, I think, perhaps sometimes exaggerate the
Yes.
problems.
Yes.
And advisors have to be careful to not give advice that could be construed to be somehow, not complying with the law. Okay, but let me just say this. Okay, in a general sense, the law requires reporting income and reporting assets, and you know, so think about making sure you report your income and you report your assets. I mean, if you've done that, yeah, you may have made footfalls and stuff like that. Okay, but it's very unlikely you're headed for any of the calamities that you'll read about online. So look, the fear thing, it's real. It's created a life of its own. But in most cases, I don't think it has a lot to do with reality because I have seen, actually, I'm going to say this, I have never seen anybody who I have known of personally who has tried to come into, well, actually, I can think of two, okay. But those were foreign trust issues and they were resolved. But I mean, just on the non-reporting and stuff like that, they can fix their problems, without fear, at least in my experience.
Well, my point isn't. My point is that the non-U.S. person has to deal with the whole fear regime themselves. Of like,
Yep.
okay, let me try to figure this out. And so the point is, what if it's not whether you should have done it, whether you got bad advice or not. The point is, after it's all said and done, and you did get advice and you went down a road, and you have half the assets that you had because you married a U.S. person, and that has happened. And that is a horrible feeling. That's a horrible feeling to put on the American, and both parties are, and that's a hard thing for people to overcome. That is a hard thing for people to overcome. And
It's a very hard thing to overcome. It's indescribably unjust. Okay. And it's very, you can't really undo it, sort of retroactively. But I think the point here is that people need to understand on a basic level that marrying an American citizen, if you're not one, is one, okay, you've got to understand. I mean, most people understand that, their spouse's extended family becomes part of the marriage, that they get. Okay, but they don't understand that for an American citizen, the IRS is part of the extended family. Okay, I guess we can put it that way.
there you go. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The IRS is
Well,
part of the extended family.
Worse than the mother-in-law, the IRS.
Keith, um, um, my question for you is this, because one of the big challenges that we have is we talk about taxation. No one wants to talk about taxation, yet it's the most critical thing that people know, and they don't hide from it. And we've been, we try to get the message out there. And I know that, from my internet training, that relationships is a huge area of discussions. People are interested in relationships. And so really maybe our path towards exposing this injustice is more through this lens of the relationship.
Yeah.
And and honestly, and now I'm thinking about people who've hired me, and actually this is true for kind of everything. A common reason why like a guy will call me up, hasn't done everything right in a few years, and he's like, okay, hey, look, I'm getting married, and my fiance said I got to clean this up.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to marry a tax problem. So that's definitely something that's common. And now with the the expat, so I think that might be this topic here is the way to discuss it, to say, well, hey, look, because there's the Democrats abroad, and they're going to tell you, oh, whatever. But what about this, guys?
Right. Let me tell you just about the relationship on how deep that it goes, and I'll give an example. There's one gentleman, a French gentleman I spoke to probably about 10 days ago, and I actually had to speak with him for almost a good hour explaining to him about the U.S. tax system, and he still couldn't believe it. And he asked me if I would say it to him in French so he could understand it. So I did. And his big fear was he would not allow his daughter to go to the United States out of fear that she may be arrested at the border because the mother, his wife, was not in the US tax system for the past 20 years. So there is this fear in the reason why he came to that decision was because he went on the internet and somebody had said that through some forum or whatever. So it just perpetuates itself and it creates such an angst in the family unit. You see what I mean? That doesn't need to be there. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
You're bringing up a great point. This is a great point, Keith. Okay, so the problem with absurd laws is that, well, when someone says the law is something else that's absurd, it's difficult, very difficult to debunk other absurd claims. When the
Bingo.
law, right? I mean, that's really the thing. It's like, oh, no, how could you be so silly to believe that craziness? The craziness is actually this. That's the problem. That, hey, look, through all of this stuff, you have to put down your logic hat. You have to put down you have to throw your human empathy away. You have to throw all of that away and just learn the system of what it is. And that's very difficult for people to take a look at a system without really understanding the model of what it is. If you go into a system like, well, it has the model of justice and fairness. Okay, then you kind of figure out where things are going to go. This has a model of, we're not sure, whatever it is, it's unsure. We can't really figure it out. And that's why I think, the best model is to look at it, the government's out to get you. That's what it's all about. That I think is the accurate model. It's not necessarily about revenue. It's about control. That's the correct model, I think, to look at it. And every, seem to be vindicated for that. So that's really what it is. Like, because, with these crazy laws, well, it creates the environment for even more uncertainty. Because how can someone really say, oh, come on, guys, you're being crazy. We wouldn't do this stuff. And wow, we do it though, huh? We sure
Let
do.
me just add another thing I just thought of while I was listening to Anthony. This I've seen 3 or 4 times in the last year. Okay, in the last year. And, the reason that God gives these to me 3 or 4 times is he knows I have to see it 3 or 4 times to remember it. Okay. But I've seen a number of instances of these sort of, we'll call them these families where one's an American and is given a gift of, real estate or something from a foreign person, never lived in the United States, has no idea that they have to report that on 3520 or lose about a third of it in penalties. So, this is another problem here, right? It's the risk of not knowing about laws that you couldn't even imagine would exist, right? How, for example, if somebody's living in Africa and married to an American and they're a wealthy person, and they give the American a piece of real estate, a house, what have you. I mean, it has nothing to do with income. It's not reportable as income.
Yep.
They just have received this. How can anybody possibly imagine that somehow the U.S. Internal Revenue Code could have anything to do with something like that? Okay, but they don't. Report it. Law is clear. Gift from a foreign person over $100,000. They don't report it. The penalties start, and it's very, very clear that the the Treasury Department is not shy about asserting penalties in these circumstances.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
So my question to both you gentlemen is, or I'm going to make a statement and see what you think, is that the American spouse, if he or she has not been in the U.S. tax system ever, or hasn't been in 20, 30 years, they really need to think long and hard on whether they should enter or re-enter the system, on what it will do to the family unit before they make any type of move. Would you say that that's a fair, pragmatic, logical statement?
Yes. And I have certainly had these situations where people who weren't in the system hired me to come clean, and they're not in the system, and then they went away. Like, they figured it out. I couldn't tell them. They went away, and I'm like, okay, client went away. What can I do? So that is yeah, happens all the time. John?
Well, what I think is this, is that people who have not been in the U.S. tax system need to first understand what their tax returns would look like. What does it mean? I mean, you don't just walk into some cross-border accountant's office and say, here's my stuff, prepare my returns. Okay?
Exactly.
You don't do that. People have all kinds of different reasons, for this stuff. I mean, their lives are different. I mean, in some cases, right? I mean, I think I'm right in saying this. Maybe Anthony can comment, but I think I'm right in saying that unless you have a specific reporting obligation, 35, 20, 54, 71, and if you don't owe any tax, I'm not sure where the basis comes to levy penalties anyway, right? So there's no independent reporting obligations. You just haven't been filing. It's not clear to me that somehow filing the returns that show nothing at all, is going to generate any problem specifically. But I think what people need to be careful of here is, what does it actually mean to file a U.S. tax return? Because remember that I think that income information is actually only peripherally related now to what they're about.
Right. And John, if I may interrupt you for a second, when you say what that's going to look like to file that tax return, yes, in the immediate, but what is that going to look like moving forward every subsequent year in filing that?
Well, that's right, of course, and that's part of the thing, right? And people don't understand this. They think about this, this coming into compliance thing, and what they're focusing on is, how do I solve my compliance problem, which probably a lot of the advice they're getting is, do a streamline back 3 years, right? But, they have to understand that, are they able to maintain that, right, on a going forward level? And, that can be, very, very difficult to do at best, and impossibly, or at worst rather, and impossibly expensive at best. So, I mean, maybe Keith, what you might suggest to people is that, they learn enough about this to try to live their lives so that, they're necessarily outside the penalty regime anyway, right? I mean, they avoid things like, small business corporations and,
Well,
like
the title of the title of this podcast, we promised to help people protect themselves. So we promised that. So I kind of want to move to that protection, and I actually think we have a great solution right here.
Sure.
And I'm going to put up Keith's email. Here's Keith's email address here, because this is really what, as I'm listening to us, like, what you need to do is get informed. And where I would start getting informed isn't necessarily with a tax professional or attorney like me or John, but this is what, Keith is an overseas advocate who knows all this and is passionate about this, lives the life, knows everything involved. I would strongly, and this is really where I'd say, if you're really concerned about, reach out to Keith, send an email, tell him what's going on, because he can give you the here's how your life is going to be. I could tell you, okay, here's the tax consequences, and here's this, but what does it mean for your life? What does it mean for your marriage? And that's where I think reaching out to Keith, because you need to start. There's so much to know, and one of our common statements is, it depends. Every situation is different. There is no cookie cutter solution, and truly, some people don't have worries. There's some married coupled overseas, like, what are you guys talking about? It's not a big deal. You're blowing it out of proportion. Those factors aren't present. The factors that we're talking about, where there's the inequity of wealth, one U.S. person, one not, those are the things that will go into it. And so I would say, going to Keith, and not necessarily going to, a tax firm first, who's gonna generally tell you, and I really have to tell you one way. I have to say, okay, do compliance. I'll warn you. I'll explain what happens if you do, what happens if you don't. but really my job is to kind of get you in there. So you just need to understand my perspective of how I look at it. It's when people are like, okay, I want to go forward. Okay, great. That'll help you. Getting to that decision, I might not be the best person to talk to, but someone like Keith certainly can go over everything with you.
Yeah, because I go over all of the options and take a look at the risk assessment of each of those options, and then that person can make a better informed decision on how they want to proceed, whether that be through you, Anthony, or through you, John, or maybe just doing nothing.
Sometimes nothing happens, right? Sometimes nothing happens. Yeah, absolutely.
I just thought of something that I think might be worth getting into this. Just give me a second on this.
Yep.
One of the problems here, okay, is let's say we've got, and I've seen enough of this, all right. Say we've got an American citizen married to a non-citizen, and they're generally navigating their life to avoid this stuff. I mean, one of the realities of life is that people die, okay? And what about a situation where the non-American spouse dies, probably as a result of learning about American tax law. Okay, but anyway, he dies, and the American spouse all of a sudden inherits all these assets. Okay, then you've got potentially huge problems, including, I think, probably a difficulty in renouncing U.S. citizenship without being covered expatriate.
Oh, yeah.
So, after all these years, the only thing that I'm fairly sure of is a phrase I created a number of years ago that I think has an enduring truth, and that's that all roads lead to renunciation. That's the option.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that is the quote that people keep telling me. If you're like, well, as John Richardson says, I get a lot of emails with that quote.
Well, it's not like, like it gives me some pleasure, but the problem is that, this is a really big problem. Okay. For many people don't know about it, but it rears its ugly head when they die. I mean, I'm getting more and more people are talking about renunciation just as an estate planning measure, which even if there were no, taxes going, etc. And, it's a big, big problem. And I really think that for people who, don't have, large U.S. asset bases or income streams and have no intention of living in the United States, I think the smartest financial thing they could do and the best investment in their marriage is to renounce the damn thing.
Well, if that's something you're interested in, here's John's email. Reach out to him here. He could really advise you on the right way to do when things get complicated. It could be, it really could be the right thing. And especially if you are, what comes down to what's your connection to the U.S., to collect. And we don't need, I was just looking at this on your Facebook group, Keith. You're concerned that the, U.S. Americans abroad aren't getting their Medicare benefits.
But which is, I'm sorry, that's a whole different topic.
Yeah, it's a different topic.
But it's just absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Man.
I get it for American pensioners to a certain degree, but it's just absurd to not take a look at what the problem is. They want to circumvent the problem and talk about all this other stuff.
Yeah.
What we're talking about today is one aspect of what American overseas organizations need to tell the politicians on Capitol Hill. That's what they need to tell them what's happening. The shamefulness of citizenship-based taxation. But they will not do it.
Oh my! Well, a great comment from Juan Segovova. How do you explain to your parents living overseas that you do not want to even have signatory authority on the bank accounts because you may have to report them in the U.S. system? And that's another. There's another. That's why we say families, because even children, when you have one U.S. child out of the bunch, things go a little, and that actually is kind of common for reason. One child goes to the U.S. and becomes a student, and then I got a visa, I got a green card. Okay, it just became while I was there. So it actually is something really, really common. And now you also can build up beefs between siblings, which is a lot of fun too. Isn't that so much fun to have a beef with your own sibling over something financial? That's wonderful. Thank you so much, IRS, for that. Yeah, great comment.
I really like the idea of setting up the U.S. Are you marrying an American marriage prep
I think
course?
so. All right. Well, you know what? That I think
That would have great value.
maybe that will be our call to action for this. We want to know, would you if people would want to see a guide? So you're marrying an American. So you're thinking of marrying American, what to do.
Still time to get out.
I think we could probably put, I think we could create a 5-minute guide, talking very rapidly would cover it, like the way they talk about the side effects in drug ads. I think we could talk at that speed. We could cover it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of different aspects to this. I think that, part of the thing is that, and this is, I'd be interested in, listeners' view of this, but I think that the whole U.S. tax problem undermines overall trust in the marriage. I'd be interested in people's view of that. Because I think it kind of does.
That, John, that's what it is. That's actually, you're hitting the nail on the head. It's a fatal lack of trust that now the spouse can't get past that. And there doesn't matter what the truth is. Once that trust is gone, it's over.
There's nothing I can do. I'm sorry, I've tried, but you're an American.
Yeah, and it's just again, that lack of belief in that, and that's what the IRS does. It makes couples. And then the other couple's like, how could you be like that to me? I'm the victim here. And the other says, no, you're the jerk. No, I'm the victim. And now
actually, that's another interesting dynamic, which just gave me another thought on this, right? Having worked with so many people over the years, right? One of the problems is that, if you have an American who's going out of their mind, with this kind of problem, the spouse is not going to be supportive beyond a certain point, okay? Because they can't relate to it if they're not experienced and they think you're exaggerating, etc. And for a lot of people, in fact, I've had one or two clients like this, I've actually told them that if they do not find a way to put this behind them, it's going to ruin their marriage ultimately, okay? Because they sort of keep going on and on and on about this, okay? So, that's a way, an area, it's like, sooner or later, people can't listen to this anymore, right? They just can't listen to it. And that becomes a problem. And the second thing I'll say is this. A number of years ago, I was on a panel at a tax conference. Actually, I was moderating the panel, so I got to pick the questions. And one of the questions that I asked was, is it more difficult and more expensive for a U.S. citizen married to a non-citizen to get a divorce? The answers came very quickly. Absolutely, to the tune of about a third. Okay, or 3 times rather more expensive. Now,
so even getting out is even worse, even there, right?
But hold on a minute. I just want to leave with this particular thought, right? So, for those who are getting a divorce and are thinking of renouncing U.S. citizenship, all right, remember there's a $2 million net worth test, right, to be a covered expatriate. So if somebody is somewhat over the $2 million, but is going to lose some assets as part of the divorce, right? Okay, you'd want to get the divorce before renouncing, because the effect of the divorce might be to move your asset level below the $2 million, right?
Yeah.
There you go. You didn't know I knew all this stuff, right, Anthony?
No, but because I'm working on a case right now, and that it's not going the way I need to. The couples are divorcing, and I kind of want them to get back together because it's going to make the tax problem solvable. Now that they're getting a divorce and really kind of headed the way I don't want it to go, you understand that we got at least 10 more years to go on this tax problem. Just, what do you want? Can you find a way to get to reality, or do you want a tax problem for the next 10 years? And all the professionals, we're all agreeing Guys, don't do this, because you're going down this road and you have no idea that this won't resolve, because it's far too there's just too much when you're throwing divorce in it. What's the most complicated thing in the world? Well, the U.S. tax code. What's the second most complicated thing? Oh, divorce law. And then it's like, okay, well, we're going to combine them both here, and now we're going to have shifting targets or shifting people that you can't get anything, and it's some situations are impossible to solve. That's actually kind of the one where time will solve that one. Here's Mike has a comment. He says HR Block has this already, so I think this is a go for us. HR Block already has a section where they warn Americans to get advice before they marry a non.
Mike, I'd be curious to see where you're seeing that. If you want to send that over to me, I'd be very curious to see that. I mean, I certainly think that's a reasonable thing for them to do. But the question: would people believe you on this? Remember that when people are getting married, they're usually thinking about good things, planning weddings and stuff.
Yeah, you don't want to see, you're looking for all the good things in your partner before you get married. You're not, like, hey, you made it this far. Let's not, hey, we gotta get to the finish line here. Let's go.
Well, there are good things. Don't forget that they can get a green card as an immediate relative relatively quickly. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, if the game plan is to move to the United States, then sure, absolutely, right? Because it's, I mean, that's one of the few categories that's not subject to, to numerical restrictions and stuff, right? So it's not all doom and gloom, okay? Where the problem arises is always American citizens trying to live outside the United States, right?
How dare they? How dare they? How dare they? You mean the tax base of America dares to live outside America?
Whatever they are.
Well,
whatever.
That I think this is so I think maybe we'll look into creating a video what to do before thinking about Americans. Again, I want to just share everyone's email. Here's Keith's email here. If you are thinking about, want to figure out really what to do and get advice from a good friend who can tell you a lot of things, what's going to happen, I got to recommend you to check out Keith. He's probably talked to more people in situations like you than really anybody else. He really knows his stuff. And he's been around, and he's actually picked up a lot of tax knowledge. He doesn't realize it, but he actually has. So he knows a lot of questions already. And I want to get John's, if you are thinking about renunciation, really, John, I can't think of anyone better than John. Think about it, here, and the foreign gift issues as well. Go to John. And lastly, I want to give a little promotion for yours truly here. Let me just get my email up here, wherever it is. Where is it? Here we go. Here's my email address. My firm, we help out a lot of people come clean with the IRS, clean up things. We help out a lot of business owners overseas. Returns are complicated in filing. Something that I've been doing, it's great success, people really like it, is that I'll actually review your last 3 years of returns for free when you sign up for tax prep for 22 or 23 when that's due. So just email me. Pretty simple to get started. Just email me. Tell me what's going on. aparent@irsmedic.com. And that should wrap up today. Anything else? Final. Oh, wait. We have one more comment. Who is this here? One more from Mike. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. Exactly. This is Anthony Parent for Iris Medic. I want to thank John Richardson and Keith Redmond. As always, thank you so much, gentlemen.